Hey everyone, I'm Susan Linder, your host of the Innovation Storyteller Show. Today is going to be a look at your own brain in a way that you have never conceived of before. We're going deep, deep, deep into your subconscious success. And that's why I am so thrilled to be joined by a great friend, a fantastic colleague in innovation, and a very deep researcher on the topic of cognitive brain science. Phillip Campbell is a cognitive scientist, executive brain coach, and the CEO of enigmaFIT, a global brain coaching company. For the past 25 years, he has been coaching Fortune 500 executives and entrepreneurs in the US and Europe and Asia Pacific. He has dedicated his career to understanding and leveraging the science behind how the brain processes information and how it rewires itself to enhance our ability to think differently, to learn, and to adapt. Phillip is also the author of the recently released book, Brain Habits: The Science of Subconscious Success. And I could not be more thrilled that you are here with me today, Phillip, all the way from Australia. Thank you for joining me.
Yes, hello from down under, Susan, and great to see you there. Thank you for having me on your podcast. First, I'd just like to congratulate you on becoming one of LinkedIn's top 20 podcast academies. That's a great achievement for you.
Oh, thank you so much. Could not have done it without this incredible listening audience. So thank you. Thank you. So let's dive in, Phillip. You and I met working on all things enigmaFIT, right? Trying to really get the message out around this fantastic company, but the science also that you've discovered that you so badly wanted to share with the world. And now the book is here, and I couldn't be more thrilled. So why this book, and why do we need it, Phillip? Why?
So I think we've all seen that the world is just under a constant barrage of change and it's accelerating. But what are we doing for our brain to adapt and deal with all of that? Because if we keep using the old technology of the brain and things are changing quicker than we can adapt, then we're going to be left behind. So it's so important that people understand the whole concept behind fluid thinking, behind subconscious thinking habits, because they unwittingly drive your performance and particularly your ability to innovate and deal with complex problems or opportunities.
And you introduced me to the term VUCA, and it has been the bane of my existence ever since. Can you tell my audience what VUCA is? Because I know for sure they are experiencing it, whether they know this handy acronym or not.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. The background behind VUCA is that it's actually a term that was developed by the US military, and it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it means we're about to fight a battle that we've never fought before. So we can't just leverage off our experience and knowledge of how we've fought battles in the past. We need to think very differently and very creatively. And to do that, it's underpinned by our fluid thinking capability. So everybody's facing VUCA at the moment, yes.
Yeah, I mean, if COVID did not wake us up to finding ourselves in situations that we cannot anticipate, that we haven't experienced before, that are in a constant state of flux, right? And we still need to respond at our highest and best purpose. And even coming out of this, the new change and adaptive models that we're doing, whether it's working from home or it's looking at suddenly ESG models, right? And climate change, all of this is kind of landing upon us as decision makers, as innovators, as change makers now. And we really have to find the ways to address these things. So the brain, you say, has capacity, but as we use it at the moment, isn't necessarily suited to taking in all of this volatility all at once. Is that right?
Absolutely. And perhaps it would help if I gave a little bit of neuroscience and cognitive science 101 to help position that, Susan.
Oh, we love all the sciences here. Bring them on, please. We love it.
I'm glad that you're very open there. So let me first of all talk about the concept of fluid thinking. So it's defined as the ability to solve new and novel problems that you've never faced before and in uncharted waters. Sounds a bit like the innovation process, doesn't it? So fluid thinking is very closely and tightly knitted in to the way people think, adapt, and innovate. Now, the interesting thing with fluid thinking is it peaks at young adulthood. And then as you get older, it just drops off. So that's why very old people find it very hard to adapt and change, etc. So what we encourage people to do and what we focus on is, well, if we can measure the fluid thinking of a person at a point in time and see the gap between where it is now and the ideal level, then we can provide a development program to bridge the gap. Because if you don't, it's going to get harder and harder to adapt and change from a business point of view and an innovation point of view.
You know, I think that's fascinating because, when we think of someone really being stuck in their ways, or we think about someone who is closed-minded, what we're really saying is that the brain has ceased to be fluid in terms of how it learns and takes in information, but also how it adapts to new situations. And I had this experience this weekend trying to teach my 95-year-old mom how to use a smart TV when she's never encountered an app before. The explanation of what an app is, and that it is not a channel on the TV, but kinda, is amazing. It's an amazing test for me as an innovation storyteller, trying to convey what an innovation looks like to someone who has no conception of it. My mom is still in flip phone mode, right? So
Well, at least
taking
she's
her
got
over
a
that
flip
bridge
phone.
is challenging. I'm sorry?
At least she's got a flip phone.
Well, it's never used because it has to remain charged, Philip. And if it doesn't stay charged, God knows what will happen. Don't want the
Indeed.
charge to run out.
Indeed.
So take us through. There are 4 pillars, from your book about how we think about how the brain works. Let's talk about those.
Yeah, and if I can just pick up on your last point and with your mother there, and then move into the 4 pillars. So basically, what happens is the way we code. We have 10 subconscious thinking habits,
10.
and that's what fluid 10. Yep, and fluid thinking is composed of those 10 subconscious thinking habits, and I'll go through some of those in a moment. But the way they're coded in the brain is through the activities and games that we do as a child. So if you do a lot of activities and games in a particular area and you repeat it and you repeat it and you repeat it, that's how you're writing your brain computer program for something like analytical thinking or strategic thinking or innovative thinking. So the brain you have today nominally hardwires about late teens, early 20s. So somebody can in fact be adverse to change and not very adaptable from their 20s because of the way they've programmed that adaptability part of their brain. So I think it's really important. It's not just the age, but obviously if somebody is quite inflexible in the younger adulthood, they're going to be much less flexible when they get older. So I just want people to understand that. And the corollary of that, Susan, is that as an adult, unless you do something to change that computer brain program, it'll stay the same. So what we do is we literally recode the brain, but we do it purposefully and with intention, not in an ad hoc way you did as a child. And nobody we've ever tested has had the ideal results on the 10 subconscious thinking habits. So I hope that helps to position where fluid thinking and subconscious thinking habits fit.
Okay, so total sidebar. What happens in the course of a midlife crisis when someone goes from, in the box, specific kind of way of thinking, and then a life event happens, right? Something changes at midlife where you say, I'm going to become a vegan, I'm going to become a marathon runner, I'm going to suddenly climb Mount Everest, I'm going to go from, being a corporate person to an entrepreneur. Boom. What happens? Because we do find, right? It's fascinating. Some of the greatest discoveries, some of, our innovators listening will find the greatest breakthroughs take place predominantly when you are in your 40s and 50s, sometimes in your 60s, that real innovation, real breakthrough thinking takes place later in life. What attributes What do we attribute that to?
So what happens is if somebody's taking a direction 90 degrees or 180 degrees from where they're currently going, then by definition, they haven't been there before.
Mm-hmm.
And so the brain is forced to adapt. And we had one client who was not very adaptable and fairly rigid and black and white in their thinking. And they threw them into a totally different area. And we tested them after that. And their brain had become much more adaptable and innovative because they had to do everything from first principles there. So this is what I mean. If you do something and you repeat it over and over, but in a guided and structured way, you will literally recode your brain and that particular subconscious thinking habit, in this case, innovative thinking and adaptability. So that's
So
what
our
happens.
beginner's mind, if we decide to take that leap into the place that we don't know, our brain begins to become more fluid. We can actually break up that rigidity that we've imposed upon ourselves.
Well, it has to, otherwise you revert back to the mean. So if the person doesn't continue on that path and they go, it's all too hard, they'll revert back to where they were and they lose the opportunity to innovate. So that's basically what happens.
Hmm. So walk us through the pillars, Philip, so we know. Well, we
Sure,
have the 10
sure.
pieces and then we have the 4
Yeah.
pillars.
Yeah, so I'll do the 4 pillars and the related subconscious thinking habits. So the first pillar is the ability to control your attention, and that's underpinned by focused thinking. Now, what it is, it's the brain's signal to noise ratio, and over 90% of people we've assessed are only low to moderate in that. So they'll come in, they'll have 2 key things they need to do. The phone will go, the emails come in. Somebody says, Susan, can I have 5 minutes? And even though you know it's not going to be 5 minutes, you're down that rabbit hole because your brain actually loves to be distracted.
I
So
love
that's
it.
what we mean. That's what we mean. And the thing is, you can't do that through willpower. You have to go through a recoding process so that becomes simple and easy. And it's the analogy I use. It's a bit like the mobile phone. You look down and you talk your way nicely. You got 5 bars of signal, and then you're walking along and it starts to crackle, and you've got 2 bars, and then it goes down to 1 bar, and then it finally drops out. That's what's happening with your brain
Yep.
from an analogy point of view. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar, and perhaps this is most relevant to your innovators, is what we call complex problem solving pillar. And I see that as complex problem solving or opportunity solving. They're often 2 sides of the same coin from there. And it's made up of 3 different subconscious thinking habits. So the first one is analytical thinking. So it's what we use to define a problem. So if somebody is lower at analytical thinking, they find it very difficult to break a complex problem or opportunity down into smaller bite-sized chunks, which is what the brain needs to define it. And we had one person we worked with, Dave, you can read about him in the book, and he found that extraordinarily difficult because he was lower on analytical thinking. And then basically he would leapfrog, do a Superman jump into solution mode prematurely. And then the second part of the complex problem solving, Susan, is to do with what we call innovative thinking. And I use the story of Goldilocks here. I'll just explain to you what's Goldilocks got to do with innovation thinking. So somebody who's not very creative in their thinking, not very adaptable, very black and white, has low innovative thinking. And the most painful thing for them is when you ask them to go into a brainstorming meeting and ask them to come up with creative ideas, because they look at you blankly and go, I've got nothing. And they're not lying. They'll tell you their brain just doesn't work that way. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got somebody who's off the wall in creativity, and they come up with all of these different ideas, but not many of them are very practical, and their ability to execute is somewhat limited. So what we want to do is to bring the 2 together so there's a nice balance. So think of Papa Bear, not very adaptable, Mama Bear, very creative and adaptable. So we want Baby Bear, who retains and brings the creativity there, but also gets the ability to execute and be very pragmatic from the papa bear there. So that's the style of innovative thinking that we want. And so we work with people to get them into that just right level.
So talk about how you do it, because I've been through your process, right? I've taken the test, and you pegged me very well as having focus issues because I'm ridiculously inquisitive and I constantly crave variety and novelty. And that some people get really excited at the beginning of a task and then fizzle out. Some people are very slow to get started and then love being there at the finish line, like, and want that sooner than later, right? So there are so many different ways that you test. Can you talk a little bit about the process, because you've done so much research in this area? How do you
Sure.
test executives for how their brains function?
Sure. So what we do is we test the 10 subconscious thinking habits. And most people go, wow, this is not what I'm expecting. Because what we're testing is there's a theory called routinization novelty theory. So it's basically saying that novelty, newness, innovation is the domain of the right hemisphere. Now, the right hemisphere doesn't have a language. Its communication is through pictures, diagrams, holistic parallel processing. And the left hemisphere is more serial processing, it's language-based, etc. So our assessment just consists of pictures and diagrams. And what we're doing is isolating each of those subconscious thinking habits muscles so that we can test them. And let me give you an example. So with
Yes,
the
please.
focus thinking, because 90% of people we've tested have low to moderate, as I mentioned. So what we do is in this picture, we set up a signal and then we hide it as much as we can with a whole lot of noise and other lines around the signal. And so the task of the person is to click on each time on the online profile they see the signal. And to do that, they have to weed out the noise. And so we test how effectively they do that and how quickly they do that. And then when somebody's lower on that, what we do is just take them through the sorts of things that they might have missed out doing as a child and use a deliberate practice technique, which is Professor Erickson's. And he talks about to do the change, to get the change that's sustainable, you need to be guided by someone who's an expert at something, can mentor you, can give you feedback. So what we do, have you ever done a Where's Waldo?
Of course.
So Where's Waldo is, I think, the ultimate test of the signal to noise ratio, because the signal's Waldo, and then there's all these other people around Waldo trying to hide him. And that's what's happening for your brain. So the signal to noise ratio, what we do is we do variations of that, and we do it harder and harder. So we make it easier to find the signal, then harder and harder. And by doing that, we get the brain signal to noise ratio up, so it can work in business, it can work in innovation, it works in social, because those other people are basically distractions. And most people's brain is wired to love distraction. Some people think they can multitask, but that's just not true. They're just switching quickly. And interestingly, Economist magazine found that report in 2020 on the cost of lost focus, that 28% of a person's time, working time, is lost due to distractions, and it costs US companies nearly $400 billion a year. So this is a really non-trivial issue. And if you really want to keep your personal innovation and team's innovation on track, the thing I'd really emphasize is getting that focus up, because it also underpins all the other things that you need to do from a subconscious thinking perspective. And then we just retest it to make sure the person's made the change. We're very quantitatively based. And if they need a little bit more development, we just take them further in advance. And then once we've got that so wired in, then their brain can control their attention, because up until now, whatever grabs a person's attention drags the brain off track in terms of what they're trying to do. So does that help to explain it?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, right? There's a whole discussion like, are we more productive working from home or in the office? Are there more or fewer distractions in either of these places? And if I'm distracted about thinking about doing the laundry when I get home, is it not better just to throw the laundry in and work from home? So
Yeah,
not to mention, it really got me thinking as you were speaking about what we're doing to our kids' brains on social media, because
sure.
the level of distraction is massive. And I think it's challenging for young people to sit down and read a book. Heck, I know for myself, it's challenging to go to a movie theater and sit through the whole experience without having your phone on your lap, right? We've become like a two-screen generation at this point.
Yeah, and again, so what's happening from a brain science point of view, what they're doing is repeating an activity over and over and over again. So your brain's saying, give me more of that, give me more of that, give me more of that. And there's also science around, there's a bit of a dopamine hit, et cetera, et cetera. And what unfortunately is happening is you're reducing the person's, we were talking about controlling attention, you're
Yes.
reducing the child's attention span. So you look at what's changed. You went from movies to TV to YouTube, and now you're on TikTok and you've got seconds to deal with it, and Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. So it actually is impacting the ability of people to stay focused. And focus is an interesting thing, because when you're, say, analyzing data to define a problem, you want to use your logical, rational, you want to be totally hard focused. But when it comes to then doing, once you've defined it, the innovation process, you need a different style of thinking. So you actually want a soft focus. And so it's so important that you set up the signal of the brain so that when you go into that innovative thinking mode, I like to go and look at water. So I'll go down to the beach. If I'm really looking to think innovatively, I've already set up, what am I focusing on? I will have defined the problem. And if it's complex, I'll leave it a couple of days so the subconscious is percolating away. And I'll go down to the beach and I'll just defocus. I'll have a very soft peripheral focus. And that's when the subconscious say, hey, here's your eureka moment, or here's your aha moment. And other people will do it under the shower or going for a walk in the forest. So it's really important that when you're really wanting to get that breakthrough thinking, that you're doing it in an innovation thinking zone and setting it up for optimum success, so you do get that eureka moment.
Mm. Yeah. And so for so many of us, the process of what we're doing and the stories that we tell to get people on board with our breakthrough ideas is dependent upon creating small iterations of the current idea, right? And in the process of storytelling, we call that breadcrumbing. So I'm
Yep,
dropping like little hints that allow the brain to connect from where
yep,
we are today, status quo, into a future that might seem unknown or scary or risk, that's filled with risk. How
yep.
do we think about using our brain's capacity to help people withstand the fear of risk and the fear of change?
Okay, well, can I revert back to the pillars, because I think you picked up on
Please.
a really interesting idea. So I'll just finish off on the complex problem solving. So you've defined the problem, you've come up with 10 great potential solutions. You then use conceptual thinking to prioritize them, and to then select the optimum one.
Mm,
And in part of that conceptual thinking, well, high conceptualizers, process information like that, and they often get to the end before people are still waiting back on it. But they will be able to look at, well, how well aligned is this solution with our long-term strategy? Because they're big picture thinkers, they're not so much the detailed thinkers. So you pick up the risk and alignment there. But also what we do is the third pillar is called strategy, planning, and execution. And so we have a methodology, a 4S methodology, and we start off with strategic thinking. So, okay, how are we going to create the path to get us from the outcome we want to where we are now? And
mm,
that's what we use strategic thinking for. But as part of the process, we build in each time, let's identify risk and how we're going to mitigate them. Now, I don't do that from a negative point of view. I actually do it from an innovation point of view. Because if you force people to look at the risks, you force them to change their perspective and use a different perspective thinking and see things that they probably may not have seen before.
Mm.
Because, one of the things with overly innovative thinkers is that they gloss over the risks and don't worry about them. Not that that would happen with any of your people, but when it comes, there's no point coming out with this.
We're very focused on failure. We're familiar with having failed in our observations or our assumptions and things like that. It's certainly part of our innovation culture, right? Is we have to embrace the failure too. But yes, we can hop over, right, with our rosy colored glasses, the desire to take us into a future that other people might not see yet, and maybe some of the pitfalls for us too. But that's
Yeah,
part of this, right? Is understanding
absolutely.
this.
Well,
Yeah.
well, one of the phrases that I learned when I first came to New York to set up the business there was this one, and everybody's probably familiar with it, was test and learn. And I said, what is, because it wasn't a phrase we were familiar with in Sydney. And the client basically said, well, if we like what you're saying and what you're doing, we'll test it. And if it works, we'll do more of it. And if it doesn't, it's not that we've failed. It's, oh, we've learned something, and how can we do it differently there? And I think that sort of reframing for innovators gets the brain to be in what we call a positive emotional attractor state. So what
Positive
that does,
emotional attractor
attractor
state. I think I
state.
have to put this in my dating profile, Philip.
Well, yeah,
Yes.
well, think of what the acronym says, PEA. So that would definitely make you stand out. But
Another conversation, but go ahead.
indeed. But what it does, and it's really important if you're leading brainstorming. So what it does, it opens up the brain circuits to be more innovative in their thinking, open to change, etc. And so you reinforce every idea as to how it's helping you get to the end. Because what the biggest mistake in brainstorming is to put in people's brains into a negative emotional attractor state, or an NEA. Because if you critique or evaluate that idea that they've just put forward to feeling really happy about in the moment, what do you think is going to happen to their brain?
Mhm.
It actually shuts down their brain circuits. They go all internal, and you probably lost them for the rest of the brainstorming there. So really important from an innovation point of view. Separate out brainstorming from the evaluation process, and you'll find you get a lot more better ideas and quicker, and you invite people's brains to contribute more fully.
Yeah. It's funny. We often say on this show that in innovation, we need both the people who build airplanes and those who build parachutes. We need the optimist and the pessimist, those
Yeah,
folks who will see either side of it, but it's the timing that matters, right? When we introduce that kind of critical thinking, negative thinking into the brainstorm, there's a time where we need this big expansive thinking where we let all the
exactly.
ideas in and we're
Yeah,
receptive to them. And then there's another time that say, okay, let's put these on the dartboard and see which ones actually hit and which
yeah,
ones we
yeah,
can
yeah. Which
discard.
one goes through? And
Yeah.
again, I've often seen with clients that last crazy idea generates an adjacent idea, which is just exactly what you want. But that adjacent idea wouldn't have come up if the other one about the crazy idea hadn't been the trigger to come up with that more pertinent solution. So it is very important. And there's also, if you look at risk, there's two areas that address risk. So one is what's called intuitive thinking.
Uh-huh.
So this is more of a sensing type of thinking. And what it does, it allows a person to kind of read a trend or identify a trend or an opportunity or a risk early in the piece. And it's not by logical pinpoints on data. Oh, I've got a feeling we're at a pivot point. And then, it catches up. So people that have got highly developed intuitive thinking have a head start on us. They also have the ability to identify risks early because they got very strong gut feel and very strong street smarts. And I say to people, gut feel is just your right hemisphere processing information in parallel very quickly and giving you it doesn't have a language to talk to your left hemisphere. So it gives you a feeling, something's not quite right. But you know what? That might just work for this. So I don't advocate making decisions based on gut feel and intuitive thinking, but I certainly strongly reinforce if you get that strong feeling, check it out more because there's usually something to it, whether it's great opportunity or hey, there's a risk here that you haven't really taken into account.
So is it true that we can actually cultivate intuitive thinking?
Yes, yeah. And it's funny because what happened, a little bit of the science 101 again. So it's
Please.
underpinned by an aspect called environmental awareness.
Hmm.
So, you know, if you walk into a room and you're about to present, you've got, I don't know, 20 or 30 people there. You can't look at the 20 or 30 people individually one by one. Your brain scans and intuits the vibe of the room and how it's going. And, you know, this group's on side, but these ones, so I might put a bit more effort in there. And what happened, this is my hypothesis, during COVID, we stopped meeting people face to face. We stopped doing presentations to the room. So our ability to intuit and read the room, because we weren't using it, began to atrophy. And so we
No.
found that during COVID, people's intuitive thinking dropped off because the way of engaging with it, so I'm looking at you 2 feet away from me on a screen, I have a very hard, narrow focus. But to read the room, you need a very broad, soft focus. So what we do is we work with people to improve their environmental awareness, and through that will improve their intuitive thinking, their gut feel, and their street smart.
Wow. So fascinating that this atrophied, and I'm a professional speaker. A lot of my colleagues and listeners also speak. And we
Hmm.
had this sense of like, we craved it. We missed it. We missed the
Yeah.
energy back from the room rather than speaking to 2,000 people on Zoom, right? We
Yes.
missed that because the ability to read the room is part of what makes hearing a speaker so great is the interchange of energy with one another, which is information received in the body. And i
Yeah.
still i still remember hearing Bruce Springsteen and Barbara Streisand talk about their experiences of stage fright. And Barbara Streisand said that she stopped touring altogether because she couldn't handle the stage fright. It would force her to forget the lyrics that she had written to her own songs.
Wow.
And she said, I feel the energy coming from the crowd and it comes into my body and it swirls around like a washing machine and it makes my brain blank out. And
Yeah.
they interviewed Bruce Springsteen, do you ever have stage fright? He goes, I get on that stage and I feel the energy coming from the crowd and it goes through my body like a washing machine. And then I take it all in a deep breath and I start to sing and I give it right back out.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's the flow
yeah.
that allows me, because otherwise it comes at you at a tsunami until you give it back again. And I thought,
Yes.
wow, what a phenomenal way to describe both the experience of stage fright and what we do with energy as we receive it.
Well, it's really interesting. I'll share with you what I think may have been happening for both of them, if that would be of interest there.
For sure.
You know, to your point, when you present, you have a dance. When you present face to face, you have a dance with the audience, and you know, you move, etc., etc. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes.
So there's another thing called Yerkes Dodd law, and what it does is its performance is kind of on the vertical axis, and our stress level is on the horizontal axis. So the stress level measured by the amount of cortisol in your system. So what it does, it's like the inverted U curve, the bell curve. So there's a zone where if you have just the right amount of adrenaline and cortisol pumping through, you're at your peak performance. And this is relevant to innovating as well.
Hmm.
But if you get too much cortisol pumping through, which I hypothesize may have been happening with Barbara,
Hmm.
and your cognitive performance drops right off. It only takes a small increase in cortisol and adrenaline to have your cognitive performance drop off 50%. So if you've had cognitive performance drop off 50%, then you'd have great difficulty remembering the words. Whereas Bruce, he's in the zone and he probably goes even more into the zone because he feeds in. And again, this is a function of the wiring of the brain, and it's to do with the resilience. One of our clients, when I explained it to them, they went through the program, we retested, and I said, what's one of the main differences you got? And she said, I'm much less flappable. I said, that's good. I'm not sure that there's a word flappable, but I'm really pleased about that.
I think
She
it's the
said, well,
20s with the flappers. Yes.
exactly. Well, quick as a flash, she came back and said, well, Philip, think about it. If there's a word unflappable, there must be a word flappable. And I said, I'm not sure, but I love your logic. So what she found is that instead of it being kind of a narrow peak performance zone, it really broadened out to a much flatter U. So it took a lot more stress for her to notice a difference in her cognitive performance. And again, if you're trying to innovate and you're overstressed and you're overtired, then you're not giving your brain a chance, because you need to be in that performance zone. And that's one of the things we do. We build up that resilience to be operating at peak performance at much higher levels of stress and adrenaline and cortisol pumping through. So that's my hypothesis as to what was happening with the boss and
Babs.
Yeah, Babs. Yeah, I was trying to think of her nickname, Babs. Thank you for helping out there.
So, as we're concluding, Philip, what are some tips that you could give my listeners as incredible innovators, as change makers, as catalysts in their respective organizations, who need to be unflappable, in the face of so much, desire for speed and risk aversion and everything else that comes along with being a change maker? What tips can you give our folks about their own subconscious brain?
Sure. So the tips I would give are to recognize that when you're going through an innovation process, that you're using at least 4 different types of thinking styles.
Okay.
So number 1 is the focused thinking. Get your signal clear. So what is this innovation project about? And because the issue is, one of our clients, the CEO said, what are we working on? And somebody said, oh, we've got 120 projects. And they said, you're kidding. How do you focus on 120 projects at one time? So they radically reduced it and the performance went up. So the CEO gave them and said, unless it's to do with generating a much better customer experience, put it on the back burner. And so just that focus. So team leaders in innovation need to be really clear where they place their focus, and they need to become more aware of when they're being distracted by interesting things, but they aren't germane to the issue at hand.
Right. Or lots of corporate distraction that says focus on the bottom line. There's lots of other political pressures inside that universe too.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And the issue is that what I talk to CEOs about is the only sustainable difference from your company versus your competitors is the quality of your people's fluid thinking and ability to innovate and adapt. Because if you don't have people, and it's, there's teams, but everybody should be charged with that and folding it into the team there, because that's the only sustainable competitive advantage. And so in that sense, the next level I talk about is use analytical thinking to define the problem. And until you've really defined the problem and identify the success criteria, no matter how tempting it is, don't do a Superman, leave a tall building and go straight into solution mode, because then you're going to come up with great solutions to the wrong problem.
Oof. Yep.
And then once you're kind of the lead needs to say, okay, well, I think we've defined the problem well. We all on board with that, great. Then to switch to that more softer focus and let the innovative thinking just gestate. So sleep on it is a really wise thing to do, and go to places where you can feel kind of relaxed and let those eureka ideas come forward. And remember not to evaluate at the same time you're brainstorming. And then the last thing I'll do is use the conceptual thinking to prioritize them and evaluate it. So they're 4 very different thinking styles. And the issue is that most people don't have all 4 of them at the highest level. So if you have 1, 2, or 3 of those at a lower or moderate level, it's going to impact your own individual innovation capability, and by aggregate, the innovation capability of the organization. So that's what I'd really counsel, that they do that. And the other thing is to understand that these subconscious brain habits, by definition, it's below conscious threshold, are unwittingly driving your thinking and your solutions. So be open to checking out your subconscious thinking habits and be aware that you can reprogram them through this deliberate practice approach that I was talking about before. But that
Yes.
happens over time. It's like, if you want to get buff in the gym, you can't just go there, do one session and bada boom, it's done. You need to go there and practice it over time and do harder and harder ones till it becomes, as one of our clients says, this is great, I now have a new normal. So that's what I would encourage.
Fantastic. Phillip, so where can people get in touch with you? Where can they find out about your book, the consulting for teams, executive coaching? How can they find out about all of this brilliant work you do?
Sure. Well, what I'd recommend is you go on Amazon or any of the online bookstores, and you can grab the ebook and Kindle, and the paperback will be coming out around the middle of the year. The reason I say to do that is we've just touched the tip of the iceberg. They really want to get their head around it. That's the place to start. And for those that want to put a bit of a toe in the water, we do provide a complimentary assessment of the focused thinking, the ability to control attention and distraction. So to do that, you go to enigmaFIT, so enigma of the brain, and then FIT.com, and then /focused test, all one word. And that'll take you to our website, and that'll take you to our e-commerce site where you can test that complimentary. And for those who want to take a bit of a deeper dive, they can go and purchase the comprehensive test of the 10 subconscious thinking habits. And that's at enigmafit.net. Let me make sure I get the right one on that. So www.enigmafit.net/shop, and they can purchase it there. And finally, what I'd say is my email address is info@enigmafit.com. And please feel free, for any of your innovators and podcast audience there, if they want to reach out to me, just put Susan Innovation Storyteller in the line, in the subject line, so I've got a clear signal. And if they want to explore things more, or explore how they might help their team innovate better, more than happy to have a bit of a chat to them about that as well.
Yeah, I can't share with my audience enough how illuminating it was for me to figure out this, red, yellow, and green light kind of on my own ability to see where, there are the softer parts of my mental workout that are required in order to keep fluid thinking happening. So I strongly, strongly encourage you to go to enigmafit.com and take that /focus test and really go ahead and give it a try. You will surprise yourself, innovation community, about where are the soft spots in your innovation life and how you can make it better. So Phillip Campbell, thank you so much for joining me today, all the way from Melbourne, Australia. We so appreciate having you on the show.
Great. And it's great to be with you, and I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.